Welcome to Swayambhu course NGOs and Sustainable Development, Unit 4, Module 28, World Summit on Sustainable Development, Johannesburg Summit 2002. Learning Objectives. By the end of this module, you will be able to learn about the Earth Summit, understand the need for coming together and agreeing as member nations in an international forum, comprehend where we are and where we need to go. Now let us see the list of Earth Summits. In 1972, the United Nations Conference on Human Environment was held in Stockholm. In 1982, Earth Summit was held in Nairobi, Kenya. An Earth Summit was held between 10th to 18th of May 1982. The events of the time, namely Cold War and US political scenario, made this summit a failure. It is not even mentioned as an official Earth Summit. In 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, or famously known as the Earth Summit, was held in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. In 2002, the World Summit on Sustainable Development was held, and again this was called as the Earth Summit 2002 or Rio Plus 10, and it was held in Johannesburg, South Africa. In 2009, there was a conference held by United Nations Climate Change Conference or the Copenhagen Summit, and this was held in Copenhagen, Denmark. In 2012, the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development was again held, and this was called as the Rio Plus 20, again in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. This was called Plus 20 because it was held after 20 years after the 1992 Earth Summit, and the Rio Plus 10 was called because it was held 10 years after the 1992 Earth Summit. The next summit was in 2018, the 7th Digital Earth Summit, and this was called as the DES 2018 on Digital Earth for Sustainable Development, and it was held in Africa in El Jadido, Morocco at the Faculty of Science, Chohob Daukiki University from April 17th to 19th, 2018. In 2019, the Santiago Climate Change Conference, featuring the 25th session of the Conference of Parties, which is the COP25, to the United Nations Framework Convention for Climate Change, which is UNFCCC, and the meetings of the UNFCCC subsidiary bodies was convened between 2nd to 13th December 2019. The United Nations Climate Change Conference are yearly conferences held in the framework of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is UNFCCC. They serve as formal meetings of the UNFCCC parties, which is called as the Conference of the Parties or commonly known as the COP, to assess the progress in dealing with climate change, beginning in the mid-1990s, to negotiate the Kyoto Protocol to establish legally binding obligations for the developed nations to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. The picture shows the structure of the United Nations climate change negotiations. From 2011 to 2015, there was one set of conventions and conferences held, which included the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, 1992, Conference of Parties, COP, which was held annually, and subsidiary party bodies meeting, which is called Permanent SBSBI or SBSTA, which was held twice a year. Further, ad hoc working group on the Durban platform for enhanced action was held between 2011 to 2015. Approximately twice a year it was held. Between 2016 to 2018, we have the UNFCCC Conference of Parties, which is the COP. Further, the Kyoto Protocol Conference of Parties was held annually, and the Paris Agreement 2015, again Conference of Parties, was again held annually. Further, subsidiary to this was also held twice a year every year. Further, from 2019 onwards, we have the Conference of Parties of UNFCCC. We have the Kyoto Protocol Conference of Parties, again held annually, and we have the Paris Agreement Conference of Parties, which is being held annually. Now, this is the list of conferences which was held over the years starting from 1995. The COP1 was held in Berlin, Germany, followed by 96, 97, which had Conference of Parties 2, 3, etc. Across the globe, the Conference of Parties was held, and almost annually the COP conference meetings were held. Further, till 2023, the plan has been presented on where the conference is going to be held. It is expected that 2022 conference COP27 will be held in Sharm el Sheikh, Egypt, and in 2023 the COP28 will be held in Dubai, UAE. Now let us see the background of very important Earth summits. In 1972, as we have already listed, we have the United Nations Conference on Human Environment, which was held in Stockholm. The United Nations Conference on Human Environment was first held in Stockholm, Sweden during June 1972, and it marked the emergence of an international environment law. The Declaration on Human Environment also was known as the Stockholm Declaration. The Stockholm Declaration set out the principles for various international environmental issues, including human rights, natural resource management, pollution prevention, and the relationship between the environment and development. The conference also led to the creation of the United Nations Environment Programme, which we know as the UNEP. The Brundtland Commission, set up by Gro Harlem Brundtland, the pioneer for sustainable development, provided the momentum for the first Earth Summit of 1992. Now let us see in detail the Earth Summit 1992. The United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, also known as the Rio de Janeiro Earth Summit, or the Rio Summit, or the Rio Conference, or the Earth Summit, was held between 3rd of June to 14th of June during 1992. The Earth Summit was created as a response for the member states to cooperate together internationally on development issues after the Cold War. Due to issues relating to sustainability being too big for individual member states to handle, Earth Summit was held as a platform for other member states to come together and collaborate, and most important, to agree. Since the creation, many others in the field of sustainability show a similar development to the issues discussed in these conferences, including non-governmental organizations, NGOs. Earth Summit succeeded in raising public awareness on the need to integrate environment as well as development. The conference drew 109 heads of states to Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, to address what were dubbed as urgent problems of environmental protection on one side and socio-economic development on the other side. So during the summit, it was decided that we need to plan between the environment and the economic development of any nation, since globally environmental protection is a necessity. The World Conference on Human Rights, for example, focused on the right of people to a healthy environment and the right to development, two controversial demands which needs to be balanced, and this was discussed by the member states during the Earth Summit 1992. The issues addressed during the summit include systematic scrutiny of patterns of production, particularly the production of toxic compounds such as lead in gasoline or poisonous waste, including radioactive chemicals. Alternative sources of energy to replace the use of conventional fuels like coal and oil was also discussed, and they found that there is a strong linkage between the utilization of fossil fuels to climate change. New reliance on public transportation system in order to reduce vehicle emission, congestion in cities, and the health problems caused by the polluted air and smoke was also the issue taken up during the Earth Summit. The growing usage and supply of water, importance of protecting the world aquatic system were some of the points which were discussed during the Earth Summit. An important achievement of the summit was the agreement of the United Nations Framework Climate Change Convention, which in turn led to the Kyoto Protocol and the Paris Agreement. Another agreement was not to carry out any activities on the land of indigenous people that would cause environmental degradation or that would have been culturally inappropriate. The United Nations Framework Convention on Biological Diversity was opened and it was given for signature at the Earth Summit, and it made a start towards redefining of measures that did not inherently encourage the destruction of natural ecoregions and the so-called uneconomic growth. World Oceans Day was initially proposed at this conference and it has been recognized since then. The Earth Summit resulted in the following most important documents, and hence Earth Summit 92 was recognized as a very important convention. It resulted in Rio Declaration on Environment and Development, Agenda 21, Forest Principles. Moreover, important legally binding agreements, that is the Rio Convention agreements, were open for signature. Convention on Biological Diversity, Framework Convention on Climate Change were some of the most important agreements which was presented in the Earth Summit 1992. Next, coming to the Earth Summit 2002, which is Rio plus 10. The World Summit on Sustainable Development 2002 took place in South Africa from 26th of August to the 4th of September 2002. It was convened to discuss sustainable development among organizations 10 years after the Earth Summit, which was held in Rio de Janeiro. It was therefore nicknamed as Rio plus 10. The declarations in this Johannesburg Convention was called as the Johannesburg Declaration, and the main outcome of the summit, however, was it laid out the Johannesburg Plan of Implementation called as the Action Plan, where the member states were asked to come to an agreement for an international signing. The agreements were Johannesburg 27 August agreement was made to restore the world's depleted fisheries for 2015. It was agreed to by negotiators at the World Summit. And further, new agreements between the government and which were coming together in the Earth Summit was organized, and around 300 partnership initiatives were laid down, which were called as the Type 2 as opposed to Type 1 partnerships, which are more classic outcomes of international treaties. They were to be the key means to achieve the Millennium Development Goals. These are kept in a database of partnerships for sustainable development. However, these Millennium Development Goals, as called as the MDGs, were further replaced by the SDGs, that is Sustainable Development Goals. The official summit was a whirl of 7 thematic partnership plenaries, statements by non-state entities, 4 high-level roundtables, addresses by heads of states and other senior officials, and it was a multi-stakeholder event. Unlike the Earth Summit, which was held in 1992, which produced 4 major environment agreements and also the Agenda 21, the International Blueprint for Sustainable Development, that is WSSD, was never intended, and it was proposed during the Rio plus 10 conference. The official summit achieved seven main successes. 1. A sanitation target. 2. Acceptance of the need to de-link economic growth from environmental degradation. 3. The reaffirmation of the principle of access to information, participation, and justice. The fourth success was the launching of some key initiatives and partnerships for sustainable development. The fifth is the recognition of community and indigenous people right. The sixth success, which was proposed and accepted during the Rio Plus 10 summit in Johannesburg, was acknowledging the importance of ethics. And finally, the promotion of greater corporate responsibility and accountability, which is very much required for sustainable development. However, the WSSD did have its own list of failures also. The government in Johannesburg looked at the world, recognized the world's immense development and environmental problems, acknowledged they need to do more to respond to these challenges, and then concluded very weakly by ratifying the existing efforts and approaches that have been found wanting. The absence of new commitments and innovative thinking, particularly on the global environmental issues and how they threaten in all the countries, was not properly presented or acknowledged, and no agreements were arrived at during this Johannesburg conference. The inadequate progress on time bound targets was not fixed. Renewable energy utilization targets was not fixed. It was proposed that renewable energy has to be used, but targets were not fixed. Climate change, Rio principles, governing globalizations. So, all this was mentioned, however, no agreements were arrived at. Now, let us see each of these in detail. The inadequate progress on time bound targets. The strong focus on time bound targets during conventions was refreshing, although the UN Millennium Development Goals, which was previously agreed upon, was not taken up. Important new targets, of course, were set up in the areas of sanitation, fisheries, biodiversity, but however, it had lots of controversy. A more ambitious and a stronger set of development targets with firm timelines could have been a major could have made a major difference if such targets and timelines were fixed during this convention. However, WSSD failed to clearly provide such targets. Next, coming to renewable energy. The final sticking point in the negotiations was the failure to reach an agreement on how much target they will use renewable energies. Say, for example, if developing countries accept to use, say, 40% of their energy from renewable energy, it would make a very big difference in reducing the environmental ecosystem, or it will help in developing the environmental ecosystem. So, such targets of the member states were not fixed in the case of renewable energy. Third comes climate change. As with the renewable energy use, negotiators at the WSSD had the opportunity to take a considerable step forward on the issue of climate change and Kyoto Protocol. However, they did not take up this challenge, they did not set up any targets. Next, coming to the fourth, Rio principles, the plan of implementation could have been clearly highlighted. What was significantly required could have been highlighted during the convention, which was missed out. Coming to 5, the governing globalization. The plan of implementation gave unqualified ratification to the monetary agreements on financing and development. Despite a call for the examination on the relationship between trade, environment, and development, the WSSD conference of Johannesburg failed to signal how development cooperation and expanding international trade could be directed towards the achievement of the sustainable development goals. There was no mention about the relationship. The inability of the governments to agree on reforms of the existing global environmental governance system, how to ensure an effective financing of the sustainable development, make meaningful accountability. Such discussions was not held, and they were very important for the future. A recurrence of the failures of the Rio appeared here, and it was found to be inevitable. Next, coming to the Earth Summit 2012, which is called the Rio 2012 or the Rio Plus 20. The United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development, also called the Rio 2012 or Rio Plus 20 or the Earth Summit 2012, was the third most important international conference on sustainable development, which was aimed at reconciling the economic development and the environmental goals for a sustainable global community. It was hosted again in Brazil, Rio de Janeiro, from 13th to 22nd of June 2012, and it was a 20-year follow-up on the Earth Summit 1992. It was held in the same city, and it was a 10th anniversary of the 2002 World Summit held in Johannesburg. The decision to hold 2012 conference, that is the Rio Plus 20 conference at Rio de Janeiro, was decided in the UN General Assembly during December 2009. It was intended to be a high level conference including heads of state and government, and as well as other represented, and it was expected to result in a focused political document which will be signed by all the member states, and this was expected to shape the global community for a sustainable development. This is a picture of the Rio Plus 20 conference, which was held on sustainable development at Rio de Janeiro. The priority areas which was proposed during this conference, 7 priority areas were identified, which included jobs, energy, cities, food, water, ocean, and disaster readiness. A sampling of related proposals also included a low carbon economy, sustainable resource management, and decent jobs are some of the demands that was made during this conference. Others called for addressing the needs of the rural community. Still few other member states suggested employment opportunities which connected with investments in the natural capital or the natural resources. Energy, many people share the common objective of providing free access to energy resources which is inexpensive. Some push for targets to raise the energy efficiency and the proportion of renewable energy utilization in the total energy scene. Others call for promises to phase out the use of fossil fuels as well as the subsidies that is given by some of the governments. Next issue that was being discussed was sustainable cities. It is widely acknowledged that urbanization is on the rise, and the structure of the cities, particularly the mega cities, has to be a key component. As the growth of the cities come in, there should be sustainable development happening in the cities. Cities want more authority, money, acknowledgement for their roles. However, it calls for a sustainable development considering all aspects such as housing, sanitation, development, and commercial establishments. Coming to food security, suggestions argue for a right to food and adequate nutrition, as well as the necessity to remove trade restrictions and political restrictions that obstruct the production and trading of agricultural goods. Coming to water, some proponents call for reforming water and wastewater management, as well as a goal of universal access to clean water and adequate sanitation. Others ask the Secretary General's Advisory Board for Water and Sanitation to start thinking about new objectives for managing the water resources. Oceans, as the blue economy receives more attention, calls are being made for a deal on the conservation and sustainable use of the marine biological diversity, as well as the governance of marine areas outside the national borders. Others propose ending the fishing subsidiaries. Others call for a second conference on small island developing states. Proposals for disaster preparedness are also put forth during this convention. Health, migration, forestry, family protection and support, gender equality, sustainable accounting, reporting are some of the other themes which also was covered during the Earth Summit. Despite having initially chosen 7 priority topics, debate over what should take precedence was carried out during the Rio Plus 20 meeting, and it was evident that the list is not sufficient. Further additions to the list was being proposed. The green economy is the first theme that was proposed during the Rio Plus 20 conference. It included financial growth, green city, green economy, circular economy, green growth, zero waste, green planet, ecological economics, feminist economics, postmodernism, environmental economics, green politics, eco anarchism, anti globalism, global consumption, waste recycling. So, according to a consensus reached by the government delegation, each country will adopt its own green economy model and a policy, analyzing the national objectives and adjusting the measures to national institutions and the economic systems. Lack of consensus on what is green economy and what is required for sustainable development was debated. Some consider it as a component for attaining sustainable development, and few others feel that all the three economic, social, environment has to be given equal importance for sustainable development. Others express concern that this is not sufficient and there has to be other aspects which also needs to be considered for sustainable development. The Rio Plus 20 organizers defined green economy as the intersection between environment and economy. High level authorities deciding on policy alternatives to support the green economy and encourage more international cooperation may be something that the organizers would like to see or discuss during the Rio Plus 20 convention. Is green economy equal to sustainable development? Was a query, was an issue which was discussed during the conference. So it was decided that green economy includes low carbon growth, resource being used efficiently, as well as bringing social inclusivity. Only then green economy will lead to sustainable development was the decision taken up. Background materials and side meetings were also held during the convention at the local, regional, and global level, along with corporate entities, to ensure that the green economy is promoted. The planning for the conference emphasized how different sustainable development definitions and strategies, which were present in different geographical areas, were also considered and was included. The significance of the private sector in sustainable development is one aspect of the green economy. Many private agreements on investments in clean energy, pollution management, water infrastructure, other commercial and development ventures were also discussed, and it was found that the private sector investment and contribution is very important for sustainable development. Trade related issues were also discussed during the Earth Summit to consider the dangers of protectionism and subsidization, compliance of national policies with WTO regulations. The significance of domestic conditions were also discussed, and it was proposed that the green economy should hence also include social inclusivity. Participants might argue on issues like transfer versus commercial sales when they discuss how innovations, which is crucial to environmental friendly development, should be produced, and it was found that it is very essential that innovations that take place should include environmental considerations, and this was disseminated across national borders. The Earth Summit Rio Plus 20 was identified as the biggest UN event ever organized, with 15,000 soldiers and police guarding around 130 heads of state and government, with more than 45,000 individuals who gathered in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil for the 10-day mega summit. This further resulted in a 3-day high level UN conference which was organized by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. It was attended by 192 UN member states, including 57 heads of states, 31 heads of government, private sector companies, NGOs, and other groups. India was one among the nations which attended this conference. At the same time, an unprecedented number of NGO represented attended the conference in the Rio de Janeiro, and they were part of the global forum where they shared their individual expectations and predictions for the future of this planet, and where they stressed the importance of keeping environmental protection at the forefront while working towards socio-economic development. The objectives of the conference, it stressed on three objectives: to secure renewed political commitment for sustainable development, to assess the progress and implementation gaps in meeting the previous commitments, and to address new and challenges which is emerging in the future. The theme of the conference had two agenda: how to build a green economy to achieve sustainable development. The second is how to improve international coordination for sustainable development by setting up an institutional framework. This 10-day mega conference was intended to be a high level international gathering organized to redirect, renew global political commitment on the three dimensions of sustainable development. The three dimensions include economic growth, social improvement, environmental protection, which is the three pillars of sustainable development. Further, it was focused on reducing the poverty while promoting jobs, clean energy, and a fair, sustainable use of the resources. They were they were planning to ensure that the goals which was established during the Earth Summit 1992 will be achieved. The conference centered around Agenda 21, the outcome summit of the Earth Summit 1992. That document was considered revolutionary in that it essentially created the term sustainable development, and it created the global environment agenda for the next 20 years. So similar lines was proposed and targets was expected to be set. The representatives of the participating government gathered in this conference to discuss what will be the next course of action and what will be the outcome that will be expected. Rio Plus 20 sought to secure affirmations for the political commitments made during the past Earth Summit and ensure that every members, the heads of government, heads of state, agreed to this convention targets, and they set forth the Agenda 21 and implementation gaps present so that in the coming days the targets will be achieved. Like the background reports and the side sessions, the draft communique titled The Future We Want is interdisciplinary and very comprehensive. The theme, The Future We Want, was set in this conference. Only 25% of the draft text has been agreed upon, which is a little sad. The UN wanted Rio to endorse UN Green Economy Roadmap with environmental goals, targets, and deadlines, whereas developing countries preferred establishing new sustainable development goals to better protect the environment, guarantee food and power to the poorest, and alleviate poverty. There shouldn't be any formally binding agreements that was made during the conference. Delegations of the government concur on a procedure for identifying new SDGs. The conference agenda also includes reform of global environmental organizations, with particular emphasis on the UN Commission for Sustainable Development. From 20 to 22 June 2012, world leaders representatives met for intense meetings, and this culminating in finalizing the non-binding agreement. Again, please note it is a non-binding agreement. The Future We Want outcome document of the United Nations Conference on Sustainable Development. It opens with the agreement states that we, the heads of state and government, and high level representatives, having met in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil from 20 to 22 June 2012, with full participation of the civil society, renew our commitment to sustainable development to ensure the promotion of economically, socially, and environmentally sustainable future for our planet, for the present, and for the future generation. So, this was the statement which all the member states, heads of states and government agreed upon and signed. This 49-page non binding document largely reaffirms the previous action plan which was presented in the Agenda 21 document of the Earth Summit of 1992. The document, The Future We Want, was called for the development of the Sustainable Development Goals, which we have studied in detail in the previous module. It is thought that the SDGs would pick up speed, whereas the Millennium Development Goals did not take off to a large extent. According to 23 June 2012, a newspaper Guardian article, it is presented that nations agreed to explore the alternates to GDP as a measure of wealth and take environmental and social factors into consideration while calculating the GDP, and this was an effort to assess and pay for the environmental services provided by nature, such as carbon sequestration and habitat protection. So, they came out with a new framework or a methodology for calculating GDP which accounted for environmental protection. Recognizing the fundamental changes in the way societies operate, consume, produce is indispensable, and it has to be taken into account when we talk about global sustainable development. All nations reaffirmed their commitments to phase out the use of fossil fuels as well as the subsidies that was given for fossil fuels. In addition to the outcome text, there were over 400 voluntary commitments for sustainable development which was agreed upon by the member states. This is a picture where all the member states which attended the UN Conference on Sustainable Development for the Rio Plus 20 conference is shown in the picture. We see Manmohan Singh, who was the Prime Minister of India, also participated in this conference. This report summarized the Rio Plus 20 goals and the key issues, and it provided a sample of a wide range of perspectives that government representatives, the NGOs, the business executives, trade associations, and representations of youth, women, etc., need to do and need to agree upon for accepting the Rio Plus 20 confirmation documents. Next came in the Stockholm Plus 50 convention. The Stockholm Plus 50 was a conference which was held between 2nd and 3rd of June 2022. The conference theme was a healthy planet for prosperity for all, which is our responsibility, our opportunity. This conference was held 5 decades after the first 1972 conference, and again the 1972 conference was held in Stockholm, and this conference, which was 50 years later, was again held in Stockholm, and hence it was called the Stockholm Plus 50 conference. This was held between 2nd and 3rd of June 2022, and this conference aimed to help increase the pace of transition towards a sustainable and green society by offering more jobs and ensuring that economic development and the environmental protection are balanced. It was anchored in the Decade of Action. Stockholm Plus 50 was an occasion to raise awareness about the importance of protecting our planet. It set a path for us to build back after the COVID-19 pandemic and to overcome the crisis of climate change, of nature, as well as the biodiversity loss to ensure lesser amount of pollution and waste happens. Three leadership dialogues took place during this conference, and it was attributed to be the outcome of the Stockholm Plus 50 convention. Stockholm Plus 50 recommendations and actions for renewal and trust include recommendations for accelerating action towards a healthy planet and prosperity for all. This places a very high importance for human well-being so that we leave behind a healthy planet and we ensure prosperity for all. The second most important one, which was discussed during the Stockholm Plus 50, was key messages for action from the leadership dialogues. There were three leadership dialogues held, which was considered as a very important outcome of the Stockholm Plus 50 convention. The leadership dialogue one was on reflecting the urgent need for action to achieve a healthy planet. Leadership Dialogue 2 was for achieving sustainable and inclusive recovery after the COVID-19 pandemic. And Leadership Dialogue 3 was on accelerating the implementation of environmental dimension of sustainable development in the context of decade of action. This decade of action is considered as the period between 2021 to 2030, the period, the one decade after COVID-19 pandemic. So that decade has been named as the decade of action. The third most important decision was initiatives and declarations that delivered on the three Stockholm Plus 50 principles of engagement. It was the intergenerational responsibility, the interconnectivity, and the implementing opportunity. The fourth important decision which happened during the Stockholm Plus 50 convention was consultations, reports, policy papers, and reflections. So, everything that was discussed was documented so that it is taken forward in the future and we have a healthy planet for everyone concerned. This is the moment to change it all. The business climate, the political climate, how we are going to take action so that we are able to give a healthy environment for the future generation, simultaneously have economic development. Our GDP should also increase as we progress. Now is the time for the unstoppable courage to preserve and protect our earth, our families, our livelihoods. Together, we need to invest in our planet because a green future is a prosperous future. We need to act boldly, innovate broadly, and implement equitably. It is going to take all of us. We need to invest all our time, energy, money, resources. Businesses, government, citizens, everyone should come in, should work together so that we do have economic development while preserving and protecting our environment. We need to choose both prosperous and a sustainable future. Now is the time to restore nature and build a healthy planet for our children and for their children. The time we have is running out. No sets of agreement will be successful unless the people who are involved agree and commit to having a secured future. Now let us see some questions and answers. What is the theme of World Sustainable Development Summit of 2002? The World Summit on Sustainable Development was reaffirming the centrality of health. What was the outcome of World Summit on Sustainable Development WSSD 2002? That is the Johannesburg Convention. The summit succeeded in achieving some of its goals, such as setting up time bound sanitation targets, recognizing the rights of communities to natural resource management. Yet, it has also had its own set of failures, such as failure to address climate change, to reform global environmental governance. Now, when did the World Conference on Sustainable Development 2012 take place? Where did it take place? Of course, this took place in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It was held in 20 to 22 June 2012. It resulted in a focused political outcome document which contains clear and practical measures for implementing sustainable development. So, to summarize, in this module, we have learnt about Earth summits, understood the need for coming together and agreeing as member nations in an international forum, comprehend where we are now and what do we need to do to have a prosperous future. Thank you.